Welcome to the deep dive. Sometimes it's like the stuff going on in our own heads is the biggest mystery, right?
Hmm.
So today we're diving deep into catastrophizing,
Yeah,
especially for those of you on the autism spectrum. And you don't need like a psychology degree to get this. It's going to be really relatable.
absolutely.
We're going for practical stuff you can actually use.
Yeah, we hear from people on the spectrum and their families too about how scary and isolating those, catastrophic thoughts can be.
Yeah.
So we're going way beyond just defining it, but
Yeah.
unpack how this actually plays out in everyday life, and most importantly, give you some tools to handle it.
Okay, so like picture this. You're at work, maybe a little stressed, and you accidentally hit send on an email before it's actually ready.
Oh, yeah.
Now, some people, they're like, oops, no big deal. But for someone who catastrophizes, that one tiny mistake could spiral. Suddenly, they're afraid of getting fired, losing their job, the whole 9 yards.
Right, it's like looking at the world through a funhouse mirror,
Mhm.
Everything is distorted, magnified, even if the reality is totally different. Nowhere near as scary.
Yeah.
Clinically speaking, we're talking about fixating on the absolute worst possible outcome, no matter how unlikely it is.
Okay, that makes sense. But like, why is this so much more common for people on the autism spectrum? It's got to be more than just like everyday anxiety, right?
You're absolutely right. It goes much deeper than that. And the research actually points to a few different reasons why this happens. One major factor is sensory sensitivities. Artistic individuals can be incredibly sensitive to sensory input. Things like bright lights, loud noises, certain textures. Those can feel completely overwhelming.
Oh, totally. Yeah. It's like their senses are in overdrive, right?
Exactly. And when you're constantly bombarded by those intense sensations, it's easy to see how that could lead to feeling like you're always on high alert, right? Like you're constantly scanning for threats, even when there really aren't any.
Wow.
So this heightened state of arousal can then make those catastrophic thoughts way more likely to pop up.
So it's like their brain is stuck in fight or flight mode, even when they're just trying to like grab a coffee.
Precisely. And then, to make things even more complex, you have the routine, right? Think about it. Change can be tough for anyone. But for someone on the spectrum, even small disruptions to their routines can trigger major anxiety.
Oh, for sure.
And where does that anxiety often lead? Straight to the what-ifs and worst-case thinking.
That's so interesting. It's almost like their brain is trying to create some sense of safety, of predictability in a world that can feel really chaotic.
Exactly. And when those routines get disrupted, it's easy to see how that could trigger those catastrophic thoughts, almost like a way of trying to regain some sense of control over a situation that suddenly feels overwhelming.
Okay, so we've talked about sensory overload and routines, but what about the whole social aspect? Like, social interaction can be tricky for anyone,
Yeah, for sure.
but it seems like it'd be even harder for someone on the spectrum.
Oh, absolutely. You're getting a really important point. For autistic individuals, interpreting those social cues, like facial expressions, tone of voice, even body language,
Right.
it's not always intuitive. It can feel like they're trying to understand a foreign language, but without the subtitles.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
when you're constantly second-guessing yourself, wondering if you're reading the situation right, it's so easy to fall into those catastrophic thought patterns.
So like one awkward silence or one comment that's misinterpreted, and suddenly their brain is like, yep, I've ruined this whole interaction.
Exactly, and those negative thoughts just snowball from there.
Yeah.
They might even start avoiding social situations altogether,
Right.
which just makes those feelings of isolation and anxiety even worse. It's a vicious cycle.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. So there are actually things you can do to manage those thoughts, right? To break free from that cycle.
Absolutely. The research actually offers some really effective strategies to do just that.
Mm.
It's not about erasing those catastrophic thoughts completely because, let's be real, that's not really realistic.
Right.
But it is about learning how to recognize them, how to challenge them, and most importantly, how to choose a different path.
Okay, so walk us through it. What are some of the most effective strategies?
Well, one of the most helpful techniques is called cognitive restructuring. It
Okay.
sounds kind of complicated, but it's really just about hitting pause on those negative thought loops and choosing a more balanced perspective.
Okay, I like that. How does that work in real life? Can you give us an example?
Sure, let's say someone's getting ready for a job interview and they're stuck in this spiral of catastrophic thoughts. Things like, what if I totally freeze up? What if they ask me something I don't know? What if I make a fool of myself and they think I'm incompetent?
It's so easy to go there.
Right. Cognitive restructuring would be gently guiding them to examine those thoughts a little more objectively. We might ask things like, have you ever actually frozen up in an interview? What are the chances you won't know the answer to every single question? And even if you stumble a little, does that really mean you're incompetent?
So it's about challenging those worst-case scenarios and replacing them with more realistic, more empowering thoughts.
Exactly. And often, just shifting that perspective can significantly reduce their anxiety and help them feel calmer.
I love that. And I've heard so much about mindfulness these days. Does that play a role here too?
Oh, absolutely. Mindfulness practices like deep breathing or grounding techniques are amazing for managing anxiety in general. They can really help shift your focus away from those what-if worries and bring you back to the present moment. Instead of getting caught up in those potential disasters, you're grounding yourself in what's actually happening right here, right now.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about finding that grounding when your thoughts are just racing. What are some other ways people can find that sense of stability, of control, especially with these kinds of thoughts?
Well, you know how we talked about routine being so important for a lot of autistic individuals? Creating and sticking to a consistent schedule can be incredibly helpful for reducing anxiety and minimizing those what-if scenarios.
Right, because that predictability takes away some of the unknowns that can trigger those catastrophic thoughts. It's like having directions, so there are fewer chances of getting lost.
Exactly. And it's not about making a super rigid, inflexible routine, because life happens, right? Things come up.
Yeah.
It's more about finding a balance, enough structure to feel grounded, but also the flexibility to adapt when you need to.
I love that. Are there any other strategies that can help people feel more empowered, in those moments when things don't go as planned?
Absolutely. Another really helpful approach is working on problem-solving skills. Instead of getting stuck in the fear of what might go wrong, problem-solving helps you face those potential challenges head-on.
That's so important. So instead of those catastrophic thoughts making you freeze up, you're actually taking control and making a plan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's say someone's feeling anxious about a social event that's coming up. Instead of those anxieties spiraling into, I'm going to say the wrong thing or I won't know how to act, they can use problem-solving to address those worries.
Like what? Give us some examples. How can they actually use that to feel more prepared?
Well, they could brainstorm some conversation starters ahead of time, or practice social scripts, or even just ask a friend to come along for support. By taking those steps, they're shifting from fear and avoidance to, okay, I've got this, I've thought about it, and I have a plan. And that feeling of preparedness can make a huge difference in reducing anxiety and building confidence.
I love that. It's so easy to get stuck in those what ifs, but when you've got those problem solving skills, it's like you're ready for anything.
Absolutely. And you know what's interesting? The research actually points to another strategy that's often overlooked, but it can be super powerful for managing catastrophizing. And that's seeking support.
Oh, for sure. None of us are meant to go through this alone, right?
Exactly. Whether it's talking to a therapist, a friend, a family member, even online support groups reaching out can make a world of difference.
It's true. They say a burden shared is a burden halved, right? Having that support system can make all the difference.
Absolutely. And, seeking support isn't just about venting or getting stuff off your chest, although that's definitely important too. It's also about getting new perspectives, learning from other people who've been there, and realizing you're not alone in this.
Totally. Sometimes just hearing someone else say, hey, I get it, I've been there, can be so powerful. It's like, okay, I'm not broken. Other people understand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that feeling of connection can be so healing. Talking about all these strategies, it makes me think about how important it is to create environments where autistic individuals feel safe, understood, and supported.
That's such a good point. It's not just about individual coping mechanisms, right? It's about fostering a sense of belonging and acceptance on a larger scale.
Absolutely. If we can create homes, workplaces, communities that are more sensitive to the sensory needs of autistic individuals, that embrace routine and predictability, and that prioritize clear communication well, that can make a huge difference in reducing anxiety and creating a world where everyone feels safe to be themselves.
I love that vision. It's about celebrating neurodiversity and recognizing the strengths and perspectives that autistic individuals bring to the table. And on that note, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
We have. Remember, catastrophizing might feel incredibly powerful, but it doesn't have to control your life. With the right tools and support, you can learn to manage those thoughts and create a more peaceful and fulfilling life.
And don't ever underestimate the power of reaching out for help. Whether you're struggling yourself or supporting someone who is, there are resources available. You don't have to do this alone.
Beautifully said.
Well, that's it for another deep dive. We hope this conversation has given you some helpful insights and a renewed sense of hope. Be sure to check out our website for additional resources and tune in next time when we'll be tackling another fascinating topic. Until then, keep those minds curious.